Hello, and welcome to the Wine Enthusiast Podcast, your serving of wine trends and passionate people beyond the bottle. I'm Matt Kettman, the contributing editor here at Wine Enthusiast, in charge of California's Central Coast. And in this episode, I'll talk with Ian Adamo, the owner of Somm's Kitchen in Paso Robles. Did you know that Paso Robles' focus on Rhône wines is a relatively new phenomenon? We'll hear more about that, about what each specific Rhône grape variety can bring to a blend, and we'll taste 3 of these red blends from Paso Robles, including the Tablas Creek Côte de Tablas from 2017, the Caliza Azimuth from 2016, and Epic Estate Blend from 2015, all of which scored higher than 94 points. Ian, welcome to the Wine Enthusiast Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Somm Kitchen up in Paso Robles?
Yeah, so I grew up on the East Coast and eventually moved out to the West Coast, Seattle at first. Eventually won the James Beard Award out there. It was a restaurant called Lamprey. And then it was time for my next adventure. So after 3 years, I moved down to the Central Coast, Paso Robles, and just fell in love with it, fell in love with the area, the people. And for me, sommelier, it was kind of neat to sort of be part of a community that was growing and changing. I think when I was studying, it was always me reading about other regions and what happened there. But I saw an opportunity to actually be there while it was happening, so it was kind of neat. And worked for a French restaurant for about a decade in Paso. And then about 2.5 years ago, I started a restaurant of mine called Somm's Kitchen. And each night when we're open, we do seating of 14 people. And everybody sits down at once at 6 o'clock. And we usually do about 10 to 15 courses. And then we pair about 10 to 15 wines with each course too. So it's been really great, good following, and just very, very lucky. And
so you arrived in Paso Robles kind of when the Rhône movement was in full swing. I mean, the history goes back actually pretty far. In 1975, Gary Eberle planted the first Syrah in all of California in Paso Robles at the Estrella River vineyards, and now that Estrella clone is actually planted all over the United States, really. And then it kind of ramped up with Tablas Creek. In the late 80s, they hatched this idea with the Beaucastel, the Perrin family of Chateau Beaucastel in France, to really start a really Rhône-focused vineyard in the Paso area. They looked everywhere and they found some really great soils and climate for Rhônes. And so they started planting in 1994. And they've since become kind of the nursery for all of, many of the Rhône varieties found around the country, kind of emerged out of Tablas Creek. But it wasn't really until the early 2000s when the Rhône movement kind of started to overtake kind of the historic Zinfandel and Cabernet world of Paso Robles. So you came to Paso right around that time, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was funny. I remember working at the restaurant when I first got there, and guests would be so proud that they brought in their 1997 Isosceles, which was the most important wine at the time, a Bordeaux blend from Justin. And that shifted, and 3-4 years into it, everybody started bringing, okay, now we got the Saxon, we got Booker, we got all these sort of younger brands at the time getting high scores and getting big exposure, and Paso became really known, outside of the area for its Syrah, Grenache, and Mourvèdre wine. So it was interesting, yeah.
Why do you think it's become such a hallmark for the region? I mean, what is it about these wines that make sense to be grown in Paso Robles?
Yeah, I think that the climate, the terroir, and the area is sort of fitting for it. I know that when Jason's father, Bob Haas, was living, he had me out a few times, and he would tell me the story about how the Perrins from Beaucastel had all the resources in the world to be able to go anywhere they wanted to in California, and they did a search everywhere. And just based on the soil and the climate, particularly, they chose to come to Paso Robles. So from an objective standpoint, that seemed to work. But also I think it's exciting to come to Paso because I always sort of had this little saying, come to Paso, taste the world, because there's everything here. If you read through a Wine Enthusiast and you see the scores, I think you can find Bordeaux varieties that are scoring well, Rhône varieties, and then some obscure varieties, and even Zinfandel sometimes as well. But I think for the most part, when people come into the restaurant at Somm's, they're always asking for brands that are sort of related to Rhône varieties. I think if you had to sort of just identify 1 or 2 varieties or blends that are sort of the epitome of the Central Coast from a Somm standpoint, I think it's Syrah-based, Grenache-based, or Mourvèdre-based. I think that we do it a little differently than most in the world.
So you talked about when people started to kind of bring these wines in and be proud of them. I mean, do you remember some of the earlier wines you tried that kind of turned your head into being a little bit more ready to accept the Rhône revolution in Paso Robles?
I remember one of the first wines. I said, "Wow, this is sort of just incredible." It was there's two of them there that one night. It was Terry Hogue, the Hedge. It was the Syrah. I said, "Wow, that's different," and that's Paso Robles, right? And then I started to get it a little bit. And then someone brought in a guest one time. It was the Alban Lorraine. And I said, wow, this is a wine that has the power that the Terry Hogue had, but it was so complex and just so long-lasting. It actually can hold up to other wines. Different aromas and different characteristics, but I said, wow, this is a serious wine. So it was those two, and then many more after that. So,
do you find any similarities in Old World places? I mean, I know Chateauneuf makes some pretty big wines these days. But do you see any similarity to Old, or is it really kind of its own
yeah, it's fun because living in Paso Robles, oftentimes you hear people say, okay, we want to make wine that reflects Chateauneuf du Pape or Homage. And then you get to Chateauneuf du Pape, and now they're making wines for the international market. We want the Americans and so on and forth to taste our wines, and there's some good examples of them, right? So they start to sort of become closer in style, but I usually just break it down, especially at the restaurant, just the varieties itself. You know, how can you tell this is Syrah? How can you tell this is Grenache? And how can you tell it's Mourvèdre? Whether it's from Paso Robles or France is the next step, but which grape is it to begin with, right? And I always usually look for black fruit aromas in Syrah. But I think this structure is what really separates the three of these grapes, at least when I go through the restaurant. And I always find, it sounds kind of goofy, but Syrah has these sort of chalky tannins. And what I mean by that is, I think we've all had a Cabernet before where we couldn't talk anymore. Your mouth becomes super dry. And wow, that's a really big tannic wine. I think a lot of times Syrah, even if it's a ripe version of it from Paso, sort of has this chalky tannin. So it sticks like Cabernet tannins, but then it fades away pretty quickly like chalk, where the Cabernet tannins will just keep sticking. And I think Grenache for me usually has sticky tannins. So unlike the chalky tannins, they're not quite as intense, but they stick around longer. They just keep there. So if you don't like that sensation in your gums, maybe you don't like the Grenache. And I always say Mourvèdre has the cowboy tannins. They're just sort of masculine and leathery and animalistic and so on and so forth. And then if you want to talk about aromas, like I was saying, the Syrah usually has some sort of black fruit aroma to it. Grenache is usually a little bit prettier red fruit. Mourvèdre usually has some blue fruit. If anybody ever had a Chateau Beaucastel, it usually has blueberry notes on it, right? Because the Mourvèdre heavy wine. So
right, you know, these wines really stand out in blind tastings that I do for the magazine because they have the power and they have, you know, great, delicious, immediately accessible flavors, and usually the tannins are pretty resolved by the time that they get to me. But are they age-worthy wines? I mean, what do you think about, that's kind of can be a measure of great wines. I mean, are these like hedonistic wines we should be guzzling now, or should we sit on them and see how they resolve? I mean, it's still, like we've been talking about, a relatively young movement, especially in this bigger blended style. I mean, what do you think? How long are these wines going to last?
It's always a great question, because at the restaurant I have a little retail side of the business too, and of course when people taste wines that night, they bring some home with them. But one of the questions all the time is, okay, when is this ready to drink? How long can we save it for? Will it last, right? And I always fall back to the structure again. It's sort of like, okay, if there's a little tingle in your tongue and there's acid on the wine, and or there's tannins in the wine will probably age for a little bit, If you're drinking it now and it's just soft, opulent, soft, it's probably not meant to go for more than another year or two. Neither one of them is good or bad. I think it's just understanding that. I think a lot of the bigger, more fruit-forward, more opulent Paso wines are generally made to sort of be drunk between 1 and 5 years. There's always exceptions. I think that L'Aventure is one of the exceptions that is great, just sort of how long they last. And he's been here for a while now, so we're able to taste some of his older wines and say, wow, these are still really bright and still really sort of connected and put together well. Mm-hmm. So I think that's fun. Of course, Tablas Creek, among others. And then there's some other brands that just sort of, they make the wines to be drunk now. And again, I don't think it's a good or bad thing. I think it's just a stylistic thing. But if you have a wine that's super sexy, big fruit, powerful, opulent, doesn't really have any tingle in your tongue, and no dryness on the roof of your mouth, meaning no tannins or acid, I think that it's probably meant to be drunk now and enjoyed now, which is fine. Yeah.
What's the hottest new trend in wine cellars? Vino View by Wine Enthusiast. The patented matrix shelf design displays wine labels forward to showcase your favorite bottles. It comes standard with 12 built-in rolling shelves, each comfortably holding 12 750 ml bottles of all shapes and sizes. With 155 bottle capacity, Vino View is the only wine cellar of this type that can hold the number of bottles it advertises, guaranteed. And it's not only sleek in design, it also has a state-of-the-art compressor cooling performance. Wine Enthusiast Vino View is available exclusively from the Wine Enthusiast catalog. Visit wineenthusiast.com and find out why customers are calling Vino View awesome, beautiful, and a must-have product. To experience Vino View, visit wineenthusiast.com or call one of our experienced wine storage experts at 800-356-8466. Well, let's speaking of trying some wines, why don't we try some of these wines here? The first one we have up is the Tablas Creek Côtes de Tablas from the Adelaide district in Paso Robles. It's a blend of 53% Grenache, 25% Syrah, 12% Counois, and 10% Mourvèdre. Looks like I gave it a 94 points, which is a pretty awesome score, and an editor's choice, which just means that I thought it was extra special. So let's give it a taste and see what we think about this.
And right away you can see how much lighter it is than the other three wines in color. So
Totally.
You're probably already thinking you're strained, but
yeah, I get like the red plum, strawberry. Sumac is a red spice that is kind of a tangy red. I think it's a tiny little fruit or something like that, and I get that on this wine a little bit. There's a bunch of acid on the palate. It's got that kind of chalky texture a little bit, maybe a mix of that sticky and chalky with that Grenache and Syrah.
yeah, definitely really bright acidity for me. Really bright, fresh red fruit, clean. Awesome, some really cool secondary aromas you're talking about. I also get a little white pepper on that as well. Mm-hmm. Spicy.
Yeah, and that can come. I mean, Grenache can be spicy, Syrah can be spicy. It'll be interesting to see as these other red varieties that they have kind of come into fruition if they're going to mix with these. Tablas does a lot of different blends. They have the Côtes, they have the Patzelin, they have all these different ones. It'll be interesting to see how these more obscure red wines kind of work their way into these blends. So great. All right, let's try the next one. Is the Kaliza Azimuth. It definitely gets a little bit heavier, but it's their 2016 Azimuth, which is from the Willow Creek district. It's a blend of 40% Grenache, 36% Mourvèdre, and 24% Syrah. I also gave this wine a 94, another impressive score. What are you getting on this one, Ian?
A lot of oak notes on this one too. I always think that the French oak has clove, cinnamon, nutmeg, vanilla, some sort of winter or Christmas aroma that gets imparted into it. And this is not an exception. It's really spicy.
Much darker in color, and we're starting to get, my notes on it from before, and I tend to agree with myself, is that, you're getting kind of roasted cocoa nuts, cappuccino, charred beef, and then that richer kind of cassis type fruit on the nose. It's starting to kind of ramp up that power that Paso can do. And they can do it with Grenache too, In a lot of places, Grenache remains kind of a lighter grape, but Paso manages to ramp up Grenache in a pretty solid way.
I think that Kaliza does an excellent job, and Carl does, with just sort of showcasing the heat and the length of the growing season of Paso. It gets like Matt was saying, more intense. So Grenache isn't always this dark in color or as fruit forward. But Kaliza does a really good job of showcasing the fruit aromas you can actually get in Paso, but also maintains the freshness of the structure. So you used always say New World fruit and Old World structure with Kaliza wines, because it really does. It showcases how ripe and how pretty these wines can be, but also doesn't go too far and sort of maintains some of the structure, the acid.
And now let's move into the third official wine. We do have a secret fourth wine too we're going to talk about, but the third official wine is the Epic Estates blend. And so they make a bunch of different blends. This one in particular is 61% from the Paderewski Vineyard and 39% from the Catapult Vineyard. So they're two estate properties. It's 53% Syrah, 26% Mourvèdre, 13% Grenache, and then veering slightly from the Rhône game, we have 5% Tempranillo and 3% Zinfandel, just kind of giving a little bit of extra spice to it. So these tend to be, they're bigger wines, but they always have the structure for me that seems like they'll last a while too,
I agree, and I think that Jordan is one of the most technically sound winemakers in town. I always like tasting her stuff. They're always so well put together. It's very, very clean, mechanically sound, and you're right. I think it's kind of fun to get that spice from the Zinfandel at the end too. I think it's kind of fun that they keep it in the blend as well. It's kind of an homage to the past.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how Jordan Fiorentini does this technically, but and I see this in the best Paso wines where there is this boldness, there's this ripeness, there's this power, and yet there's still kind of like enveloped in this, classical structure that ensures, I think, ageability and keeps it from being just a big old ripe jam bomb,
No, you're right. She does a great job of sort of, blending 5 different grapes that are a little bit different from each other. They're not even the same sort of families. And she takes all those pieces of the puzzle and makes this really cool, well-balanced wine. It's really bright, and you're right. It's going to age well. It's another good example of, I think when I first moved to Paso, there's these huge fruit bombs, and the last 7-8 years in Paso have been so great because now they're, like I was saying, embracing the fruit aromas, but really sort of paying attention to making a wine that'll last a little bit longer. And this will definitely do that because the acid's really bright. There's some tannins on it, but at the same time, you're not losing the fruit aromas. It's definitely there. You definitely know it's still from Paso.
Yeah, and their estates are on these really, especially the Paderewski estate is on this really chalky white rock. I remember the first time I went and hung out with Jordan, this is years ago at this point, and she made me lick the rocks that were there. So I was licking this white, limestone-esque rock, and sure enough, it dries your mouth out really quickly, and you can kind of almost see that in some of the tannins of this wine too. So
when I came down to Paso Robles years ago for the first time, I was still working in Seattle, and I came down for a couple interviews, and part of the interview process was going to the wineries too. I think the wineries are interviewing me for the restaurant somehow, however that worked. But anyway, I was by myself, and I had a backpack going back to the airport, and I had a bunch of soil samples because I was so impressed with what I was just talking about, the sort of chalky limestone characteristic of the area. So I had to bring this back to my friends in Seattle, right? So I'm at the airport, and I got pulled aside because I had a backpack full of Ziploc bags of this white chalky substance, and so I don't know if this is contraband or if they thought it was anthrax, but I was held in there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, for them to try to figure out what it was. So I don't even know if I'm allowed back at SFO these days, but it was funny.
That's great. And this wine clocks in at 15.1%, and I actually gave this one a 96, so one of the better scores I've given in all of 19. And our last kind of bonus wine, I also gave a 96 to. It's the Villa Creek Avenger, which is actually comes in at our highest wine. It's 15.5%, and it is 70% Syrah, 20% Mourvèdre, and 10% Grenache. And I really just like the kind of impact that this one had on the palate right away and on the nose, and it's a big time wine, but I think that Chris Cherry, makes it in a very balanced style. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pouring this at the restaurant right now, and a couple things happen when I pour it. One, those who went to Villa Creek or know Chris to say how great of a guy he is, and I definitely agree with that. But his wine, right, he's really, really good at what I was talking about, just sort of showcasing these fruit aromas. And to me, this is quintessential Syrah-based Central Coast, right? It's just, big black fruit, but his is super clean still, and there's also still a little bit of the savory aromas at the end of it. It's not just fruit, which is kind of fun because now you have the fruit from Paso Robles, but you also have some of the cool secondary aromas, and then he finishes it because it's super well balanced and high acid, so it's refreshing. It's big, but it's not intrusive.
It'd be a good wine to end the night with and serve with a nice rich dish. And all right, well, we've covered these 3 wines, and 4 wines now. Any other parting comments, Ian, on the wines we've tasted, or the trend of Rhône wines in Paso Robles? Yeah, you see it going on and persisting?
Yeah, it's great. I love it. I really love Paso region because what we just did, 4 wines here, each one of them sort of told you that they're from Paso Robles in the glass, but each one of them sort of were producer driven and stylistically a little bit different from each other, which I love. I think when I go to other regions, I think they're a little bit more monotone in the sense that, this region's known for this style of wine, which is great and easy, but I really love living in Paso where there's just so many different styles, market positions, and people. It's good. It's a good tapestry.
All right, Ian. Well, thank you for coming on the Wine Enthusiast podcast. We get to taste some tasty wines today, so hope it wasn't too much out of your schedule.
No, it's easy.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Wine Enthusiast podcast. We hope you learned a lot about Rhône red blends from Paso Robles and why they're all the rage. To recap 3 recently reviewed Rhône reds from Paso Robles that are worth picking up now, please go out and try the Tables Creek Côtes de Tables 2017, which I scored at 94 points. It's just $32. Kaliza's Azimuth blend from 2016 also won 94 points, and it's $60. And last but not least, Epic's Estate blend from 2015 got 96 points and is $50. But there's plenty of Rhône red blends to go around in Paso Robles, including that Avenger from Villa Creek that we also tried. So happy hunting! Subscribe to the Wine Enthusiast podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you find podcasts. And if you like today's episode, we'd so appreciate a 5-star review and comment. And please tell your friends to check us out too. For more wine reviews, recipes, guides, and stories, visit Wine Enthusiast online at winemag.com. The Wine Enthusiast podcast is produced by Marina Vitage and Jenny Groza. Until next episode, cheers!